It was just after 0130 hours when our aircraft crossed into Venezuelan airspace, and the first thing I noticed was the smell inside the cargo bay. It was metallic and faintly oily, pushed through aging filters that struggled against the humidity. The 8 of us sat strapped into the narrow bay of a blacked-out transport aircraft, with no identifying markings anywhere on our equipment. No names, no flags, no patches. If things went wrong, there would be nothing to trace us back to anyone. I sat closest to the rear ramp with my rifle resting across my knees, counting the minutes until the drop. 23 minutes remaining. Across from me, Staff Sergeant Nathan Cross sat perfectly still with his eyes narrowed and alert. Cross always looked like that, calm, unreadable, and focused in a way that came from surviving too many missions that were never meant to exist. Beside him, Elliot Granger, our point man, chewed gum in a precise rhythm. Chew, pause, glance at his watch, then repeat. Victor Salazar sat further back with his arms crossed over his armor, his face locked into a neutral mask. Paul Whitaker, our medic, ran his fingers across the straps and pouches on his vest again and again, as if reciting a silent prayer through muscle memory. No one spoke. The constant hum of the engines filled the space above us and vibrated through the floor. The briefing had been short and incomplete, which was always a bad sign. We had been told there was a facility hidden in the northern highlands of Venezuela, just south of the coastal range. It did not exist on any satellite imagery or intelligence database that we could access. Officially, it was not there, but equipment had been moving in and out for months. Heavy machinery, generators, and materials that raised alarms far above our level. Our task was described as simple. Insert, secure the site, document everything, and extract before sunrise. Avoid engagement unless absolutely necessary. Intelligence suggested minimal staffing and light security, in and out, quiet and clean. That was the story, but there had been something in the captain's voice during the brief that unsettled me. He leaned heavily on words like believed to be and likely instead of giving numbers. When Granger asked about hostile estimates, the captain only said to expect resistance but avoid contact. That answer told me everything I needed to know. The loadmaster raised his hand, signaling 5 minutes to drop. We moved without speaking, checking straps, tightening harnesses, securing weapons. The rear ramp began to lower, and the cabin filled with rushing air and the sharp scent of rain. Below us was nothing but darkness. Endless jungle canopy swallowed by clouds with no lights and no roads, just black stretching in every direction. Cross stood first and clipped into the line. One by one, we followed him, moving on instinct. The red light blinked twice, then turned green. Cross stepped off without hesitation and vanished. Granger followed, then Salazar, then me. The moment I cleared the ramp, the engine noise disappeared, replaced by silence and wind. I counted slowly before pulling the cord. The parachute snapped open with a violent jolt, and suddenly time stretched. I could see the others drifting below me toward a narrow clearing roughly 2 kilometers from the target site. Rain began halfway down, cold and steady, soaking through my gloves. When I hit the ground, my boots sank deep into mud, thick and heavy. We were grouped in under 3 minutes, using hand signals only. Cross pointed northwest, and we moved in formation with Granger on Point Salazar, and I covering the center and Whitaker in the rear. The jungle was louder than I expected. Insects, distant animal calls, and rain hammering through the canopy made every step feel exposed. It felt like something was listening from just beyond the trees. We moved slowly, stopping often to listen. That was when I noticed the smell. It cut through the wet earth, sharp and heavy. Diesel fuel mixed with something chemical and burnt like overheated metal. It lingered in the air as if machinery had been running too long underground. Granger raised his fist and we froze. He pointed ahead, and through the trees I saw a faint glow bleeding through fog roughly 400 meters away. Floodlights, steady and pale, marking the perimeter of the site. But there was movement as well, not guards on foot, but vehicles. 3 sets of headlights circled the outer fence in slow, deliberate loops. Cross whispered into his radio, identifying the target and reporting increased activity. The response came back, clipped and distant, instructing us to proceed as planned and reminding us the timeline was fixed. Cross hesitated before acknowledging. He glanced at me, then back toward the lights. We split into teams with Cross, Granger, and me moving east for a better angle on the entrance, while Salazar and Whitaker held back to cover the flank. The closer we got, the stronger the smell became until it burned my throat. From behind a fallen tree, I could see the compound clearly. Chain link fence, topped with razor wire guard towers on each corner, and floodlights spaced evenly. The main structure was concrete and windowless, built into the hillside. Nearby sat shipping containers and a covered vehicle bay. The patrol vehicles were civilian trucks modified with lights and roll bars moving constantly. What drew my attention was a smaller secondary building set back and connected by a covered walkway. No lights inside, but thick exhaust venting from the roof. Something large was operating inside. Granger tapped my shoulder and pointed. Two guards stood near the main gate, smoking and talking relaxed. Beyond them, figures moved between buildings carrying equipment. There were more people than we had been told to expect, too many. Something about this place was wrong, and the jungle seemed to close in around us as if it knew it too. There were too many bodies moving inside that fence for this to be anything close to a skeleton crew, and as I counted them again, my unease hardened into certainty. 8 at minimum, maybe 10, and that was only what I could see from our angle. Cross whispered into the radio asking Salazar for confirmation, and the reply came back low and tight, confirming the count and adding something worse. Multiple radio frequencies active, not local militia chatter, but structured, disciplined communication. These people were trained. That realization shifted the entire mission in my mind. This was not some lightly guarded, covert site run by opportunists. Whoever controlled this facility had resources, coordination, and purpose. I checked my watch, 0347 hours, less than 3 hours until sunrise. If we were going to act, it had to happen now before daylight stripped away what little advantage we had. Cross hesitated, scanning the perimeter again, as if searching for an answer written in the dark. Then another sound bled through our comms, not our channel. Spanish voices, urgent, clipped fragments about a convoy inbound and securing a load within 30 minutes. Cross looked at me and I nodded. Someone else was coming. Granger leaned in and said quietly that once a convoy arrived, the whole place would lock down and we would lose any chance of getting close. Cross made the call. Reaper 2 advanced to secondary position. We breached the east fence. Radio silence from here. We moved immediately, using rain and darkness to mask our approach. The fence stood roughly 10 feet high, but the razor wire above it sagged in places where rust had eaten away at the supports. Granger cut through near the base while I covered, watching the guard towers. The nearest tower was dark and empty. Either they were short-staffed or they did not expect intrusion. One by one, we slipped through and dropped onto wet gravel inside the perimeter. Every step sounded too loud. I paced out 30 steps to the nearest shipping container and held position while Cross and Granger swept ahead. The smell here was overwhelming, thick and acrid enough to sting my eyes. I pressed against the cold metal of the container and listened. Muffled voices drifted from the main building. Then a door opened, spilling light into the rain as 2 men stepped out wearing military-style fatigues without insignia. They moved toward the smaller building with the exhaust vents. Cross signaled that we had to move before they returned. We crossed the open ground in seconds and reached the cover of the main structure. My pulse hammered in my ears louder than the rain. Granger tested the nearest door and found it locked. He wedged a pry bar into the frame and forced it open with a single groan of metal. Inside, the air was hot, stale, and saturated with that chemical smell. The hallway was narrow concrete with a flickering bulb overhead and doors lining both sides. We moved in formation, clearing each room. Storage, mostly crates, tools, fuel drums, and equipment, but nothing that explained the scale of security outside. At the end of the hall, we reached a heavy steel door sealed with an electronic lock. Cross bypassed it with practiced speed, and when it opened, all of us froze. The room beyond was enormous, carved straight into the rock. Metal shelving lined the walls, stacked with communications equipment, encryption systems, satellite uplinks, and military radios far beyond civilian use. In the center sat 4 large containers marked with hazard symbols I had only seen in classified briefings. Chemical and biological components, not assembled weapons, but the building blocks for them. Granger whispered that we needed to document everything immediately. I pulled out my camera and began photographing labels, serial numbers, and contents from every angle. Cross moved deeper, checking the containers, while Whitaker warned us over comms that armed contacts were approaching our position. Cross ordered 60 seconds to finish and exfil north, but before that minute passed, the lights went out. Total darkness. Then a loudspeaker crackled to life, echoing through the structure, announcing an unauthorized breach, first in Spanish, then in English, ordering all units to engage and contain. Emergency lighting snapped on, bathing everything in pulsing red. Cross grabbed my shoulder and hauled me toward the door, shouting for us to move. Boots thundered behind us, voices shouting coordinates. This response was immediate, rehearsed. They had trained for this. Granger took us left away from the main entrance toward what looked like a loading bay. Red strobes distorted depth, and shadows turned into threats. Whitaker warned that the main gate was being sealed. The math was brutal. 20 hostiles between us and extraction. We burst into the loading bay, where 2 large doors stood closed and a side exit gaped open with rain blowing in. Suppressive fire snapped past as we moved. I returned fire, dropping a silhouette in the doorway we had just left. Cross kicked the side door wide and we spilled into the rain. Salazar confirmed a clear path northeast to the tree line and provided covering fire from the darkness. We sprinted across open ground under gunfire while headlights swung around the compound and engines roared to life. We hit the jungle and ran without slowing, branches tearing at us, roots grabbing at our boots. 30 meters in, we dropped into a drainage ditch, gasping for air. Flashlights swept past, voices coordinated and calm. Cross pulled us tight and we listened. They were not panicking, they were hunting. That was when we heard it. A low mechanical hum, deep and steady, vibrating through the ground from somewhere beneath the facility. Cross met my eyes and nodded. Something big was operating underground. Using the diversion Salazar created, we moved again, crawling through mud until we reached Whitaker. Salazar was repositioning west, but his voice was strained and gunfire crackled behind him. He reported the enemy was boxing us in. Cross ordered Granger and Whitaker to head for extraction and told me we were going back for Salazar. We followed the sound of gunfire west through worsening rain. We flattened as a search team passed within feet of us, calm, professional, cigarette smoke drifting in the dark. When they moved on, we continued until we reached Salazar's last known position. His gear lay scattered, his pack and sidearm untouched. The magazine was full. He had not fired. Fresh tire tracks led back toward the facility. They had taken him alive. Cross called out to him over the radio, but only static answered. The hum grew louder, shaking the trees in rhythmic pulses. The ground vibrated under our boots. This place was not storage. It was production, and whatever they were building had already changed the rules of the mission. Cross' voice stayed level as he called Salazar's name into the radio again and again, even though we both knew the answer would be nothing but static and rain. I scanned the ground through night vision and saw the same thing he did. Fresh tire tracks cutting through the mud leading back toward the compound, as if the jungle itself had been parted and stitched closed behind them. They had taken Salazar alive, and that single fact told me more than any briefing ever could. You do not capture someone in the middle of an active firefight unless they matter, unless what they know matters. Cross knelt and picked up Salazar's sidearm, feeling its weight, then checking the magazine. Full, no rounds fired. Whatever happened had been fast, precise, and overwhelming. Cross stood and said quietly that they wanted to know who sent us and what we saw, and that meant we were running out of time. Before either of us could move, that mechanical hum surged again, louder than before, vibrating through the soles of my boots and into my chest. The ground shuddered in short rhythmic pulses, not violent like an explosion, but controlled like massive machinery cycling through a sequence. Trees shook, leaves rattled, and somewhere deep underground something enormous was working. Cross keyed the radio, calling for Granger and Whitaker. updating them that Salazar had been compromised, and the site was active production, not surveillance. The response came back strained and broken. Extraction was not responding, and interference was cutting across all channels. We were effectively blind and deaf. That was the moment the mission collapsed entirely. No air support, no command, no clean exit. Cross made a new plan on the spot. We were going back in. We would find Salazar, gather proof of whatever this place was producing, and then move on foot to the border 40 kilometers northeast. It was a plan built on desperation and discipline, but it was the only one that left no one behind. We circled wide using terrain to stay concealed while the compound shifted into full alert. Floodlights burned bright, vehicles moved constantly, and figures appeared on rooftops scanning the jungle. The hum was constant, now loud enough to mask our movement. That was our opening. Cross spotted a drainage culvert running under the eastern fence, barely wide enough to crawl through, and filled with warm, foul water flowing from inside the facility. We stripped down to essentials, weapons, and minimal gear, then dropped into the culvert. The smell was overwhelming, rot chemicals, heat. The water soaked into my uniform as we crawled inch by inch, keeping our heads just above the surface. After what felt like an hour but could not have been more than 20 meters, we emerged inside the perimeter behind stacked fuel drums. From there, the main building loomed close. If they had taken Salazar alive, he would be held centrally, likely underground. We moved using parked vehicles as cover, timing our steps with the deep pulses of the machinery. 2 guards stood watch at the side door we had used earlier. Cross split us silently. I moved right, he moved left. I closed the distance from behind, locking my arm around the first guard, throat, and crushing his airway until his body went slack. Cross did the same to the other. We dragged them out of sight, took their radios and access cards, and slipped inside. The hallway was lit normally now, alarms no longer blaring, but voices echoed deeper within. We moved fast, clearing rooms again, until we found the stairwell leading down. The hum intensified with each step, vibrating through the metal railing and into my bones. 2 levels down, the corridor changed. Newer construction, reinforced walls, heavy doors with electronic locks. One door stood out with a small reinforced window. I looked through and my blood went cold. Salazar was zip-tied to a chair, head slumped, blood dripping from his nose onto the floor. 2 men stood over him, one holding a tablet, the other a pistol. They were questioning him calmly, methodically. He was not answering. Cross saw it too and tested the lock. Biometric scanner, no bypass without triggering alarms. We needed distraction and speed. I pulled a flashbang from my vest and waited as Cross counted down on his fingers. 3, 2, 1. I kicked the door hard, drawing their attention. Cross fired through the window, dropping one instantly. I hurled the flashbang through the shattered glass, and the blast filled the corridor with light and sound. We breached immediately. The second man was on the ground, disoriented, reaching for his weapon. Cross ended it with a single shot. I cut Salazar restraints and hauled him up. He looked at me through swollen eyes and muttered that we were late. Could he move? He said he could run if needed. The alarm erupted again, piercing and constant. We moved. No stealth left, only speed. Footsteps thundered behind us as we sprinted back toward the stairs. Cross fired short, controlled bursts down the corridor to slow pursuit. At the top of the stairs, we collided with 2 guards rushing down. I dropped the first, Cross dropped the second, and we kept moving. The loading bay came into view, chaos of flashing lights, smoke, and shouting. The side door was still open 50 feet away. A grenade bounced across the floor, stopping close enough that Cross grabbed us both and threw us behind a support beam. The blast shredded the space we had just crossed, leaving my ears ringing and the world muted. Crossmouth moved, shouting orders I could not hear, but I saw him point, and we ran through smoke and debris, firing blindly to keep heads down. Outside, dawn light was creeping in, washing the jungle in gray. Salazar dropped to one knee, covering our retreat until Cross dragged him up. We ran again toward the tree line under fire. Behind us, the hum reached a crescendo and the ground shook violently. I glanced back and saw the hillside itself moving. What I thought was earth and stone was a massive, concealed door. opening to reveal a monstrous armored vehicle emerging from the mountain. It sat on wide treads plated and bristling with equipment, a mobile command fortress built to crush terrain and opposition alike. No markings, no flags, just purpose. Its engine roared, shaking the trees as it rolled forward into the jungle after us. We did not wait to see what it could do. We plunged into the trees, running until lungs burned and legs screamed. Granger's voice finally broke through the interference, reporting extraction inbound in 12 minutes. 12 minutes felt like an eternity. The vehicle pursued, crashing through undergrowth, snapping trees with ease. We could not outrun it, so Cross led us toward a narrow ravine too tight for it to follow. We slid down into the ravine, using its walls for cover as the vehicle stopped above and troops dismounted to continue the chase on foot. Whitaker appeared ahead, already moving and patching Salazar as we walked. The ravine opened into a small clearing, extraction point. Granger was set covering the approaches. The helicopter thundered in low rotor wash, flattening grass, and then tracers arced from the tree line, striking the aircraft. Smoke poured from its engine and it banked hard, aborting the landing and vanishing into the sky. Silence fell heavy. Command ordered us to surrender and lay down weapons, promising diplomatic release. We all knew what that meant. Disavowed. Cross refused. We ran again, breaking contact, heading east toward a river 3 kilometers out. The pursuit pushed us deliberately, funneling us forward. When we reached the river, headlights blazed from the opposite bank, vehicles waiting, armed men ready. We were boxed in. Cross ordered us into the water. The current was brutal, dragging at gear and bodies as rounds hit the water around us. I went under, letting the current carry me downstream before surfacing and clawing my way to the far bank. Granger and Whitaker made it out, but Cross and Salazar struggled. I grabbed a branch and reached out, pulling them both ashore. Exhausted, soaked alive, we vanished into the jungle again, leaving the facility and whatever it was building behind us. We moved deeper into the jungle without speaking, because speech felt dangerous and unnecessary, and every sound carried farther than it should have in the damp air. Dawn crept in slowly, turning the black into gray and then into a washed-out green that made hiding harder with every step. The river had taken most of our strength, and what adrenaline remained was fading fast. Salazar was barely upright, leaning on Cross with each step, and Whitaker kept checking him while we moved, refusing to stop even when Salazar's knees buckled. We followed animal paths and dry stream beds, letting the terrain pull us northeast toward the border, while staying off anything that looked deliberate or maintained. Behind us, the jungle did not sound empty. Every now and then, I caught distant engines or the echo of shouted commands carried on the wet air. They were not rushing anymore. They were tracking patiently, certain we had nowhere to go. After 2 hours of steady movement, Cross called a halt, and we collapsed into the undergrowth, breathing hard. Whitaker examined Salazar more thoroughly then, and his face told me everything before he spoke. Fever had set in fast, and his pulse was erratic. The beating, the cold river, and whatever chemicals had been in that water were pushing his body past its limit. Whitaker gave him what he could spare and warned Cross that Salazar would not make another day without real medical care. Cross nodded and said we would not leave him. None of us questioned that, because it was not something we debated. We adjusted pace and formation and moved again, slower now, more careful. By mid-morning, the heat became oppressive, and the jungle closed in tight, forcing us to crawl and climb more than walk. The hum from the facility was gone, but something worse replaced it. Silence in stretches, broken only by birds suddenly scattering or insects going quiet all at once. The kind of silence that tells you something else is moving nearby. Several times we went flat, letting patrols pass close enough that I could hear their breathing and smell sweat and oil on their gear. These were not local forces. Their movement was disciplined, deliberate, and relentless. They were not trying to scare us out. They were hurting us. By early afternoon, we reached higher ground, and from there we could see smoke rising far behind us from the direction of the facility. Something was being shut down or moved. Whatever proof we had gathered was now gone or buried deeper. Cross watched it for a long time before ordering us forward again. As the light began to fade, Salazar's condition worsened. He started drifting in and out, speaking in fragments, asking questions that made no sense, then apologizing for slowing us down. Cross kept telling him to shut up and save his breath. When night fell again, we found a shallow cave cut into rock, barely enough to shelter us from rain, and we collapsed inside. Whitaker worked on Salazar through the night, using everything he had left, but there was only so much he could do. Salazar gripped my sleeve at one point, eyes wide, and focused for the first time since we pulled him out of that chair, and told me they were building something mobile, something designed to move entire operations underground and surface wherever needed. He said the men questioning him kept talking about deployment windows and relocation cycles. Then his grip loosened and he slipped back into fevered silence. None of us slept. Just before dawn, Salazar's breathing slowed, then stopped. Whitaker checked him twice, then looked away. There was nothing left to do. Cross closed Salazar's eyes, and we sat there listening to the jungle wake up around us, knowing we could not stay. We covered him as best we could, and moved on, carrying what little of his gear we could not leave behind. The border was still more than 20 kilometers away, and now we were 3. Grief did not come right away. There was no space for it. Only movement and awareness and the constant pressure of being hunted. By the second night, we reached terrain that began to open up. Less jungle, more scrub and rock. Roads appeared in the distance, faint lines of civilization cutting through the dark. We avoided them until we could not anymore. Exhaustion was eroding our caution. Whitaker stumbled more often, and Granger had to pull him up twice. Cross forced us to rotate lead to keep minds sharp. Near midnight, we saw headlights moving steadily along a paved road. Normal traffic, civilian, the border was close. We waited until the road cleared, then crossed low and fast and vanished into the trees on the other side. No alarms, no guards, no challenge, just an invisible line that meant everything. We kept moving for another 5 kilometers before collapsing near a small village, barely more than a cluster of buildings and a church. A priest found us at dawn and knew instantly we were not who we claimed to be, but he fed us anyway and let us rest and allowed us to use his radio. 12 hours later, an unmarked van arrived, driven by men who did not ask questions or give names. They took us to a small airstrip where a plane waited, engines running. The flight back was silent, and when we landed, we were separated immediately. I never saw Cross or Granger again. Whitaker was taken to a medical facility, and I was given new orders, a new identity, and a warning never spoken aloud. The mission did not exist. There was no report, no commendation, no record. Just silence. Years have passed, and I left the service, eventually carrying images and memories that never faded. I still hear that hum sometimes in dreams and feel the vibration under my feet and see that machine emerging from the mountain. I do not know if the facility still operates or if others like it exist, but I know what we walked in. 2 was never meant to be found, and the fact that any of us escaped was a mistake they will not make again. Time did not return to normal after we crossed that invisible line, because once you understand how easily truth can be erased, you stop trusting the quiet. The days that followed blurred together in transit rooms, debrief spaces that were not called debriefs, and medical evaluations that asked questions without writing down answers. I was moved under escort from one facility to another, always at night, always without windows, and always with the understanding that nothing I said would ever exist on paper. No one asked what we found. No one asked what chased us. They already knew or did not want to know, and either way the result was the same. Silence. When I was finally released, I carried orders that reassigned me to a unit I had never heard of, performing duties that required me to forget Venezuela entirely. My service record showed a routine training mishap and recovery. There was no mention of Salazar or the facility or the armored vehicle that rose out of a mountain like a buried god. Cross and Granger vanished into postings I could not trace, and Whitaker names stopped appearing in any system I could access. The message was clear: survive and stay quiet. At first, I tried to do exactly that. I focused on the new assignment, on the familiar rhythms of military life, on routines that left little room for memory. But the jungle did not stay behind. It followed me into sleep and into moments of quiet when the world slowed down. I would hear that hum again, low and steady, feel the vibration through concrete floors miles away from any mountain. I started noticing patterns in reports that crossed my desk. Shipments rerouted without explanation. Equipment transfers listed as weather losses, facilities that appeared in budget requests and vanished before approval. None of it was proof, but together it formed a shadow of something moving under the surface. I told myself it was paranoia until the night I saw a satellite image that made my hands shake. It was a strip of terrain in a different country halfway across the world, and for a single captured moment the hillside geometry was wrong. Too clean, too deliberate. The image was replaced hours later with an older version showing untouched terrain. Someone had noticed the mistake. Someone always notices. I requested access to deeper archives under the pretense of logistics review and found fragments that echoed Venezuela. Chemical component shipments listed as industrial solvents. Mobile power systems logged as mining equipment. All legal, all deniable, and all pointing toward infrastructure designed to move underground and surface where needed. The realization settled heavy in my chest. Venezuela had not been an isolated operation. It was a test, and we had walked into the middle of it. I stopped trying to forget and started watching carefully. I learned which questions not to ask and which patterns mattered. I paid attention to personnel changes, sudden transfers, and early retirements. Men and women who had seen too much were removed quietly, given new lives, and told never to look back. I wondered how many of them heard the same hum in their dreams. Years passed, and I left active service carrying more questions than answers, and an understanding that the truth did not need belief to exist. It only needed protection. Civilian life did not dull the memories. If anything, it sharpened them. Without the structure of uniform and orders, my mind returned again and again to that night, to Salazar's eyes when he told me what they were building, to Cross' decision to run instead of surrender, to the moment command told us to lay down our weapons and accept a lie wrapped in diplomacy. I began collecting quietly. Articles, reports, leaked images, anything that hinted at hidden infrastructure or unexplained movements. The world is louder than people think if you listen in the right places. I found mentions of facilities built into mountains in remote regions, then scrubbed from public records. I found stories of convoys moving at night under cover of weather events. I found rumors among engineers and contractors about projects that paid too well and asked too few questions. None of it was enough on its own. Together, it formed a pattern that made my stomach tighten. One night, years later, I received a message from a number I did not recognize containing only a set of coordinates and a time. Against my better judgment, I went. The location was a deserted industrial park, and the time was just before dawn. I waited for nearly an hour before a man stepped out of the shadows and spoke my name. It was Cross, older, thinner, and carrying the same calm stillness he always had. We did not shake hands. We did not need to. He told me Granger was alive, living under another name, and that Whitaker had survived and disappeared by choice. He told me Salazar's death had been written off as a training accident, and that his family would never know the truth. He told me the facility in Venezuela had been dismantled within weeks and rebuilt somewhere else under a different mountain. I asked him how he knew, and he said because he had seen it again. A different country, a different mission, same hum, same machinery, same mistake. He said this time the team did not make it out. The silence between us was heavy. Cross told me the operations were expanding, not slowing down, and that whatever was being built was nearing deployment. He did not know what it was designed to do, only that it was meant to move unseen and surface where needed to secure assets or erase problems. I asked who was behind it, and he shook his head. Not one country, not one agency. A network of interests aligned by convenience and deniability. He said the only reason we survived was because someone wanted witnesses, even if they would never speak. He asked me if I would help him gather what proof we could before it was too late. I said yes, because some choices do not feel like choices at all. Over the months that followed, we worked quietly, comparing notes, tracing movements, and watching patterns repeat. Every discovery reinforced the same truth. The mission in Venezuela was buried not because it failed, but because it succeeded too well. It showed that secrecy could protect anything if enough layers were added and enough people were silenced. I do not know how this story ends. I only know that it did not end when we crossed the border or when the paperwork disappeared. It continues every time a mountain hums and no one asks why. And as long as it continues, there will be people like us who remember what it sounds like and refuse to pretend it was nothing. What followed was not a campaign or an operation, but a long, slow erosion of certainty as Cross and I realized that what we had uncovered could not be stopped by exposing a single site or proving a single conspiracy. The machine we glimpsed in Venezuela was not an endpoint. It was a symptom, a physical expression of a philosophy that believed secrecy was not just a tool, but a shield against consequence. Cross and I worked separately and together depending on what the situation required. We never met in the same place twice and never spoke openly about what we were doing even when we were in the same room. Trust had become something you rationed carefully because everyone we had ever trusted had already failed us once. We followed supply chains that did not officially exist and tracked funding streams that vanished into shell organizations and reappeared as infrastructure projects in places no one watched closely. Every trail ended the same way. With a dead end that was too clean to be accidental, someone was always one step ahead, erasing footprints as soon as they appeared that told us this was active, not historical. Whatever was being built was still moving. Still growing, I began to understand that the real power of the operation was not the technology itself, but the compartmentalization. No single person knew the whole picture. Engineers built components without knowing their purpose. Logistics teams moved equipment labeled as something harmless. Security forces guarded sites without being told what lay beneath them. Everyone could deny responsibility because no one saw the entire shape of the thing. It was a perfect design for burying guilt. Cross shared with me a fragment he had acquired through a contact who did not survive the transfer. A schematic not complete, but enough to confirm our fears. The mobile platform we saw in Venezuela was designed to serve as a relocatable command and production node capable of operating entirely underground for extended periods. It could surface, deploy equipment, personnel, or assets and vanish again, leaving nothing behind but disturbed earth and plausible deniability. It was not built for combat alone, it was built for control. The idea was not to fight wars, but to preempt them by positioning force anywhere without warning or accountability. That was why it mattered that it could move unseen across borders and operate outside legal frameworks. It was power without fingerprints. The more we learned, the more we understood why Command had cut us loose so quickly. This was not a rogue project. It was too well funded, too coordinated, too protected. It required silence at levels that made truth itself a liability. I started to notice changes in myself as the years passed. Hypervigilance that never shut off, a constant scanning of environments for exits and threats. Sleep came in fragments broken by dreams of engines grinding beneath stone. Relationships never lasted because I could not explain the weight I carried or the reason I flinched at certain sounds. The world felt thinner, like a stage set built over something vast and hidden. Cross told me he felt the same. We joked darkly that the jungle never really lets you go, that once you hear something like that hum, it rewires you permanently. At one point, we debated going public, releasing what we had gathered and forcing the truth into daylight. But every scenario ended the same way. Discredit, disavow, eliminate. The story would be labeled fantasy or foreign propaganda, and we would disappear quietly. Worse, the project would continue more carefully protected by the lesson of exposure. Silence felt like cowardice, but noise felt like surrender. We needed leverage, not attention. That leverage never came in the form we expected. It came from failure. A facility in another region suffered a catastrophic collapse. Officially, it was a geological event. Unofficially, it was a systems overload caused by rushing deployment timelines. Too much machinery, too much power draw, and not enough patience. The collapse killed dozens of workers whose names never appeared in any report. But it created ripples. Projects slowed, budgets froze, oversight increased quietly. For the first time we sensed hesitation that told us the operation was not invincible, it was brittle, dependent on secrecy and momentum. If either faltered, the whole structure risked exposure. We adjusted our approach. Instead of chasing the machine, we focused on friction, delays, its miscommunications, anything that forced the operation to slow down. We leaked nothing directly but nudged systems toward self-interference. A shipment rerouted incorrectly, a permit delayed, a contractor investigated for unrelated reasons, small things that accumulated. Over time, the pace changed. Cross believed they were consolidating fewer sites, fewer movements, less risk. That was dangerous too. Consolidation meant deployment was near. The closer they came to using what they built, the less room there would be for doubt or restraint. One night, Cross contacted me with urgency I had not heard since Venezuela. He said he had confirmation that one of the platforms had been moved to a region bordering multiple unstable zones. The placement made no sense for logistics, but perfect sense for rapid intervention. He believed they were preparing for a live demonstration, not a test, a message, something designed to show capability without leaving evidence, a disappearance, a silent correction. That was when I understood the true horror of what we had seen. This was not about defense or deterrence. It was about rewriting reality on a small scale until no one noticed the edits, removing problems quietly until the world adapted to their absence. Once that became acceptable, there would be no limit. Cross asked me if I regretted surviving Venezuela. I told him no, because survival meant memory and memory was resistance. But I also told him that sometimes I wished I had not seen what we saw, because ignorance would have been easier. He laughed once, then went quiet. We made plans that night, not for exposure but for survival. If a demonstration occurred, we would not stop it. We would document its aftermath, patterns, movements, changes in official narratives. We would build a record even if it never surfaced publicly, because history is not just what is written. It is what is remembered by those who were there. Weeks passed without incident. Then a news story broke about a remote conflict zone where an entire armed group had vanished overnight. No bodies, no signs of battle. Local reports contradicted official statements. Satellite imagery showed disturbed terrain that was later replaced. The story faded within days, replaced by something louder and simpler. But Cross and I knew the silence afterward was different, heavy, final. The machine had been used. Whatever restraint had existed was gone. We were no longer dealing with a hypothetical threat. It was active. And we were running out of time to decide what our role in this story would be. Not as soldiers, not as operatives, but as witnesses who refused to forget. I am telling this now because silence has done enough damage, and because some truths rot when they are buried too deep, even if they were buried for the right reasons. Years have passed since Venezuela, and the world has moved forward the way it always does, distracted, loud, and convinced that whatever it cannot see does not exist. I tried for a long time to live inside that illusion. I tried to believe that what we survived was an anomaly, an isolated nightmare that would never repeat itself. But the pattern kept resurfacing in different shapes and places, and every time it did, the response was the same. Denial, delay, distraction. Cross and I stayed in contact sparingly and carefully, always assuming someone was listening even when there was no proof. Paranoia becomes discipline when it keeps you alive. We watched governments posture and corporations expand and conflicts ignite and fade, and through it, all the machine kept moving underground, unseen, and protected by the very systems meant to stop it. The demonstration we witnessed through fragments of reports and altered imagery was not the last. It was only the first one we recognized for what it was. After that, the disappearances became more precise and more surgical. Entire operations unraveled overnight with no explanation. Leaders vanished from power structures without scandal or assassination. Supply lines failed in ways that could not be traced. Each event alone could be explained away as coincidence or incompetence. Together, they formed a shadow history running parallel to the one everyone else believed. Cross said once that the most dangerous weapon ever built was not the machine itself, but the idea that problems could be removed without consequence. When you erase something cleanly enough, the world forgets it was ever there, and that forgetfulness becomes permission. I carry that thought with me because it explains why so many people never question what is missing. They only notice what remains. Eventually, Cross stopped responding to my messages. At first, I assumed he had gone dark intentionally. He was careful like that. Weeks passed, then months. When I finally accepted that something was wrong, I went back through our shared trails looking for signs I had missed. I found fragments of activity that suggested he had been close to something significant again. Too close, a facility that shut down abruptly, a contractor dissolved overnight, a region that went quiet for reasons no one could articulate. Cross was not careless. If he disappeared, it was because someone needed him to. That realization left me alone with the weight of memory and responsibility. I understood then that survival is not always the same as victory. Sometimes it only means you are left behind to remember. I stopped collecting evidence after that, not because the truth no longer mattered, but because I understood what evidence was worth in a world designed to absorb and neutralize it. Instead, I focused on telling the story exactly as it happened. Not loudly, not publicly, but accurately. I recorded details, smells, sounds, decisions, moments of hesitation and fear, the way the jungle pressed in, the way the hum felt more than sounded, the way command voice changed when we became inconvenient. Stories endure longer than documents because they adapt. They find listeners in places you cannot predict. Maybe this record will disappear too. Maybe it will be dismissed or buried or rewritten into something safer. But the act of telling it matters because it means the silence did not win completely. I often think about Salazar and the way he looked when he realized what he had seen mattered more than his own survival. I think about Whitaker hands steady, even when everything else was falling apart. I think about Granger chewing gum in the dark, keeping time, when time itself seemed uncertain. And I think about Cross choosing to run instead of surrender, because he understood that some orders are more dangerous than disobedience. We were sent into Venezuela for a mission that was buried forever, not because it failed, but because it succeeded in showing what should never have been built. The machine exists or existed or exists in some form still, and it does not need belief to function. It only needs silence. I do not know where it is now or who controls it or how many versions of it move beneath the surface of the world. I only know that it was real and that it was tested and that people died to keep it hidden. If you are hearing this and you feel a sense of unease you cannot explain, then that is the point. Truth is not always comforting. Sometimes it is a weight you carry because setting it down would mean pretending you never picked it up. I do not expect justice or acknowledgement. Those are luxuries reserved for stories that fit neatly into history books. This one does not. It lives in the margins and the gaps and the moments when something disappears and no one asks why. If there is a lesson in all of this, it is not about heroism or sacrifice. It is about attention. About refusing to let the world become so loud that you stop noticing what goes quiet. I survived that mission and I survived the years after it. And I am still here to say that the truth does not vanish just because it is inconvenient. It waits, and sometimes it finds its way out through people who were never meant to come home. This is what happened, this is what we saw, and this is why some missions are buried forever. If this story stayed with you, do not ignore it. Share it, question it, and remember that some truths survive only because someone refuses to stay silent. Subscribe for more stories like this because the missions they bury are often the ones that matter most.